Everyone, welcome to Graceful Transitions Institute. I'm Vanessa Reagans, and today I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Courtney Tracy. And we are going to talk about trauma and how to deal with it. So, hello, Dr. Tracy.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm happy it's Friday.
Yes, happy Friday. All right, so today we're going to be talking about trauma and how to deal with it. So let's begin by, if you don't mind, explaining what trauma is, defining it, and then sharing the multiple kinds of trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. To start off, I think a lot of people think about trauma as a really catastrophic, life-altering event. Typically someone will think of a natural disaster or a bad car accident or, losing someone that is very significant in your life. And those are all trauma, absolutely. But when it comes to just the general definition of trauma, and if we look at the definition, then it makes it easier for us to consider that it may be a broad spectrum of things versus just life-altering events. I mean, they're all life-altering, but not as there's non-catastrophic events that we'll get into in the live. So in general, trauma, like if you look it up on Google, what is trauma, you're going to find that the definition is a distressing event that has taken place in someone's life. I think to take that a little further from a psychological standpoint, like trauma, the way that I see it is it's something, of course, yes, it's distressing, but what does that mean? And so what it means is that it's going to overwhelm multiple systems in your body. So it's going to overwhelm your nervous system, overwhelm multiple parts of your brain, overwhelm your emotions and your feelings. And so there are lots of things in life that overwhelm all of our systems more so than just catastrophic events. And so when it comes to multiple kinds of trauma, there's a few different ways that people categorize trauma. So one way would be to break it down into every type of trauma that someone could go through, like an actual category, like physical trauma or community trauma. But there's more overarching ways to define it. And so some people define trauma as big T and little t trauma. And it's used very commonly. And I think the goal of differentiating trauma in that two ways is that it's trying to bring emphasis to the fact that it's not just those catastrophic events that are considered trauma. So big T would be those things that I mentioned, like major car accidents or like a life-threatening illness, for example. But then there's little T's, and little T's are the types of trauma that most people don't consider trauma. So if you were to ask someone if they've ever been through trauma and they say no, and then you do a further assessment on them and you realize that they had, let's say, a significant other that was unfaithful multiple times over and over again. The emotional dysregulation that's going to cause in the person's mind and in the person's body, whether they're aware of it or not, could be considered trauma. That would fall under interpersonal trauma. So that's just an example of the type of little t trauma that people would want to consider when doing a review of their life and determining whether or not they've experienced trauma. Now, some people take those two categories and they say, how could you ever call someone's trauma little? And that's definitely not the intention. So another way to look at it would be to look at these other categories. So there's acute, chronic, and complex trauma, which actually relates to complex PTSD, it's not an official diagnosis in the DSM currently, but they're working on it. And so acute trauma, acute trauma is just a one-time incident. So trigger warning for anyone watching, just so that you're aware, one incident of like trauma would be maybe like physical abuse, for example, from a loved one, and I say that specifically because when you are hurt by someone that you love, when you feel unsafe by someone that's supposed to make you feel safe, it's very, very damaging. So that's an example. Like, let's say it happened one time. That would be an acute trauma. And chronic trauma is if that specific situation happened again and again and again. And so someone could have chronic PTSD. Like, PTSD can be resolved, but you can get it again and again if the precursor to the symptoms continues. And then complex trauma is where you've had a variety of different types of trauma that are all that happen over the course of your lifetime, that include the little t trauma. So I know, I think we should definitely get into like childhood trauma, which I think is where a lot of the little t trauma comes from. Give people more clarity on looking back at their own life and determining, have I been through an acute traumatic episode, chronic trauma, complex trauma, big T, little t. As we continue talking, I think anyone that's watching will get a much better idea of what trauma is and if they've had it.
Awesome. Thank you. That was incredibly clear. I appreciate that.
Of course.
So the next part is the 5 principles when you are working with a client. What are the principles that you use when you are working with a client who has experienced trauma?
Yeah, I think that it's very, if someone experiences trauma and they're going to go see a practitioner or a clinician or a healer or a life coach, whoever it is, they always want to ask, like, what is the perspective that someone takes on trauma? Is it just biological, psychological, social, a mixture of all of them? Because when we start to open up and talk about our trauma, it can almost, you can have the same experience as when we're going through the trauma to begin with. And so you want to make sure that you address, like, what is this going to be like for me? And how can I prepare myself to go back to some of the worst times in my life, And so there's a book called Bouncing Forward. And I love this book. And I go by the same principles that are in the book when I'm working with someone on trauma. I mean, I pull in a lot of other principles, but these 5 are very important to me because if these 5 can be met, if these principles can be adhered to, then the experience of going back into your trauma is going to be significantly more comfortable and probably significantly more effective. So the first principle is safety. And the reason why that's the first principle is because when we've gone through trauma, we feel unsafe. It's put our bodies, our minds, our home, our partnerships, whatever it is, in a place where it feels unsafe, unstable, and we feel insecure. So when it comes to safety, if we're going to go back and look at this trauma, then we need to determine what's going to make you feel safe. And what is this trauma going to bring up for you? What are the negative feelings or the difficult feelings that are going to be brought up? And how can we manage those? So whether it's a coping skill plan, whether the person's trauma is so severe that you want to make sure you have a crisis line available. And so it just really is about maintaining safety, because what we're asking is for you to go back to one of the scariest times of your lives, one time or multiple times. And if we don't provide you a safe space, and you have to decide what that looks like, we'll help you create it, but it's really up to you what your safe place looks like. Like, do you want to have like a comforting food? Do you want to have a song that you put on? Do you want to have someone that you call? Do you want to have a place in your home where you can go after our sessions? What's going to make you feel safe? So that's the top principle. And then transparency. And so this is a very vital point to make when it comes to trauma, because talking about the trauma can be helpful, because our thoughts and our emotions are so tied to the trauma that we've been through. But it's also on a physical level. So we're going to talk about it, but you're also going to feel it. And that's usually the feeling part is where people get stuck.
Yeah.
And in order to really feel what's going on, you have to be transparent. I mean, you have to be willing, like, if we're going to heal it, then we've got to go there. Like, we have just got to get to the deep, deep part of where the trauma lies. And so the second part, the second principle is transparency, but with one of the other principles, which we'll talk about, it's not about expecting to come into a place where you're going to process your trauma and just offload every detail right away. And that wouldn't even be effective, but it's preparing yourself that, and building rapport with the person that you're going to be addressing your trauma with, that you are going to have to go there and you're going to want to be transparent about what's going on. And then choice. So same thing related to the lack of safety when it comes to trauma. We want to have a choice because a lot of the times the trauma that we've experienced, we didn't have a choice over it happening to us, especially if it was childhood trauma or, a sexual assault or something along those lines where we really didn't have a choice about whether or not what happened to us happened to us. So when it comes to being transparent, know that you have a choice in what that looks like. How fast do you want to go? How slow do you want to go? How detailed do you want to get? Is there a smaller trauma that you want to address first? Or do you want to address the bigger trauma first? So the choice is yours. And if anyone ever feels like they aren't allowed to have multiple choices through the processing of their trauma, then I would say immediately take some time to reflect and make sure that you're only moving as fast as you would like to, unless there's an internal core resistance, and then hopefully who you're working with will be able to address that with you. But that's really important choice. And then collaboration. So, and I think people can work with their depression or their anxiety potentially on their own, depending on the severity. But when it comes to trauma, even mild trauma, little trauma, it's ingrained in multiple areas of us. And we can't use our own thoughts to cure our own thoughts, feelings, and our bodily sensations related to the trauma. So when it comes to collaboration, it's acknowledging that we want help. We want at least someone to help guide us through. How fast should we go? How slow should we go? Let's get a second opinion on how much we reacted to going to the next 5 minutes of what happened. Maybe we should go back to the beginning. If it was a 30-minute situation, let's go back. So, and you don't want to feel alone. A lot of the times it brings isolation. Trauma brings isolation. Even if someone has experienced what we have, it's different and they can't relate. We feel abandoned by whoever caused the trauma. So building that rapport and having a relationship, whatever that looks like, even just a safety relationship with the person, is very important. So collaboration can be very, very healing. And then the last one is empowerment. And that goes back to what trauma does to us in the first place. So it can make us feel weak and make us feel like we don't have body boundaries. We don't have thought or feeling boundaries. And so it's acknowledging that the simple fact that you're wanting to work on your trauma and you're willing to even dive into it a little bit is a strength. And everything that you're going to build up while working through your trauma is a strength, because you're going to go, your mind's going to go back to, no, I'm weak, or this was my fault. And, I can't believe I can't talk about the next thing that happened. I'm just worthless. All those things are going to come up because it's fear of going back to one of the scariest moments of your life. So empowerment is key. And you want the person that you're working with to empower you, not in a fake way, because I'm your therapist, I'm going to tell you that you're smart and capable. I'm really going to get to know you and help you pull the strengths that weren't affected by the trauma into the trauma work, and help you find the lessons and the strengths that have been created from the trauma, throughout the process as well. So safety, transparency, choice, collaboration, and empowerment.
Awesome. Wow. Beautifully demonstrated. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
So moving into the types of childhood trauma, let's talk a little bit about those.
Yeah. So, we experience a lot of trauma when we're an adult, but our nervous system, it starts to get developed and determine automatic or non-automatic reactions to things that are going on. And so if we're someone that thinks perhaps that we've never been through trauma, and then we go through, maybe one of those big T traumas, and we have this really intense reaction that we weren't expecting, we might think, oh, that's just, in relation to this specific situation. But there's a possibility that your nervous system has already been prepared and had a safety plan. You call it a safety plan, even though it's a very negative reaction to what's happening. Your body's saying, I'm going to save you by having a panic attack or isolating or getting really depressed. And a lot of those patterns come from childhood. They come from the type of attachment that we have to our parents. They come from the environment, like societal environment, community, neighborhood. All of those things matter. And so there's been so much research being done in the past few decades on childhood trauma. And specifically, there was a study that was done through Kaiser and the university, where they took a look at what's called ACEs, and these are adverse childhood experiences. And what they were looking at with the research facility and Kaiser was they wanted to see the relationship between things that people may have gone through in their childhood and how that relates to or correlates to physical health issues and other psychosocial issues that someone might have in their life. And so they were able to identify a pattern of 10 childhood traumatic experiences that specifically they could relate to issues in adulthood. So I have that list here just because there's 10 of them. And so I'm going to take a look at them and kind of go into them with you and everyone that's watching. And so the first ones they're pretty, I think if you heard it, you would say, yes, that's childhood trauma. So mental and emotional abuse or neglect, and then physical abuse and neglect and sexual abuse. So mental and emotional, sexual and physical abuse or neglect. Those things are going to, and the reason why they say that these are, and it's proven that these are attached to physical health issues, is it's taking our homeostasis nervous system and it's dysregulating it. It's saying, be happy in this moment. And then when you get yelled at, submit to protect yourself. And then you get stuck in this pattern where maybe like your boss tells you to, you're an adult and your boss says something about your low productivity and you have to work overtime to prove that you're worthy of your position. And your nervous system goes, oh, this is familiar. So now I'm just going to submit and do it, and then attach all these thoughts of, this is just who you are. This is just, you just are a submissive person. You can't stand up for yourself. And we don't realize that it's our home life. And it's the childhood experiences that we've had that have made us into this person that we think we've always been, but we weren't born that way. So those are the first three, just real actual abuse and neglect. And then the one that I think a lot of people forget is, or don't consider trauma, is a lack of family bonding. So when I've shared about this on social media, so many people said, I had no idea that simply feeling unloved has affected my life long term. And it is as impactful. Not feeling loved, not feeling like you have a place in the world is just as impactful as physical or sexual abuse when you're a child, when you're any age. And that's really the main one that I think when people come to terms with the fact that they had a lack of family bonding in their childhood, that a lot of change is capable of taking place in adulthood. Like we have different relationships with our employers and with our parents that are elders at that time, and with our partners and with children that we may have. We learn that bonding is so vital because we know how it's affected our own life. And then lack of survival needs goes along with that. So like a parent, for example, who is struggling and working 3 jobs and has 4 kids and is constantly working and still can't put enough food on the table. If there's not, adequate clothing, adequate food, adequate shelter, that's really going to affect. It's going to affect a lot. It's going to affect our hope for the future. It's going to affect what we think we can and cannot do, whether we should motivate ourselves enough to exercise, which will affect our physical health later in life. Those 2 things I think are the most missed. Lack of survival needs and lack of family bonding. And then parent divorce or separation. Yeah. So we are interpersonal beings, and in order to survive, like we're not asexual in terms of biological, like we need to partner with another person in order to reproduce. And so we have been wired to connect with others. And if our first I think I would take it farther than to just say parent separation or divorce, like maybe someone that has been through the adoption and the foster system for many years.
Yes.
It alters our ability to believe that we can have sustainable interpersonal relationships. And it's going to affect the type of girlfriend, boyfriend, partner, wife, husband. It's going to affect who we become. And again, we're going to internalize that and just say, oh, this is just me. But it's not, and that's something we can work on in therapy is, your models of what it looks like to be loved and commitment and loyalty and trust and faith and unity, all of those things, if you have a deficit in the belief of any of those things from your childhood, it will result, science shows it will result in a decrease of proper physical health and psychological health when you're older. And then the three that I think, make a little bit more sense is or the four, seeing and hearing violence. Because what that's going to do is, again, it's going to make us submit, or we're going to mirror that behavior and we're going to want to be like our parents or like those people. And so we're going to either go down as a result of stress, or we're going to mirror the stressful responses. So either one of those is not it's not a healthy outcome of seeing and hearing or experiencing violence. The best case scenario would be, a child that is exposed to violence, either seeing it or hearing it, and they're able to just zone it out. But that's not a good outcome, because if they're capable of zoning it out, then they're not connected at all to their environment. So that's not good either. And then I guess the last three, just because I'm kind of going on about these for a while, is excessive alcohol and drug use. And that just shows bad coping. And then if we can't cope, or we start putting things in our body that are toxic, that's going to contribute to difficulties later in life. And then it's if there's a family member that was incarcerated. So then you have that experience of bonding with someone and then them just disappearing. Or it's someone that has a family, or someone in your family that has a mental illness. And then you automatically get exposure to the fact that the mind has the capabilities of being unstable. And what can you rely on? What should you expect? And you become very hypervigilant and very afraid to connect. And all of those things can impact us as well. And so I think they did this study because, well, first they just did a general questionnaire, and they said, all these people have so many physical health and psychosocial problems when they're older. Let's just see where it came from. And the results were incredible, which is why this has been so widely discussed in the behavioral health fields altogether. So I hope that that's helpful for people to think a little bit about, what was my childhood like? And are there patterns that I am engaging in, or is there a pattern in the environment that I've chosen that rings similarly to what I experienced as a child?
There are so many connections with that. And there is a test that they can take online, right? The ACE test, just to determine how they kind of fall in those categories.
Yes,
okay,
there is.
Perfect. I'll link that after this in the details of this video.
Great.
And so if there was somebody who understood what trauma is, but may not really understand that they have it, are there specific signs that they can kind of reflect on that would show that actually, yes, you have experienced trauma in your life?
Absolutely. So, even someone that may be watching this video and saying, yeah, I had those things in my childhood, but they didn't affect me. We can take a look at the way your life is today. And like I said, what are the behaviors? What does your environment look like? And so some of the very, one very obvious, at least to me, reason or way that I could tell that someone has some type of unresolved trauma is if they're numbing themselves with drugs and alcohol. And a lot of people think that, having a 5 o'clock beer every day after work isn't an issue. But there's a reason that you have a stressful work day and then you want to decrease your nervous system. So what is that about? And maybe, I mean, maybe there isn't a childhood traumatic history or a history of trauma, but there likely is some type there, or else we would have other ways of coping other than every day going and doing that to our bodies.
Right.
So using drugs and alcohol. And then I think, anxiety and depression, there's a root, unless there's a medical or a biological basis for someone experiencing anxiety and depression, which can happen. It's other than that, it's a response in our brain and our body to experiences that we've been through. So like, for example, for me, I had a significant amount of the childhood traumatic experiences that I just went over. And I've worked my whole life understanding psychological systems and symptoms, and I still suffer from anxiety. My anxiety is directly rooted in my childhood. I know it is. So, but if I didn't know it was, and I looked at this list that said, you may have unresolved trauma if you're experiencing any of these things, I would say, wow, I had a lot of these in my past. And this is very helpful to get this list. So hopefully it's helpful for other people listening as well. So excessive drug and alcohol use, just depression and anxiety in general. And then one of the other ones is feeling like you just can't tolerate intense emotions. And I think some people may perceive this as, well, yeah, I get that. I can't handle intense anxiety or intense, someone getting really angry at me. But there's also people that can experience or want to handle intense love. Like maybe it's just like, you love me. Well, that's really scary because my mom loved me too. And then she had a psychotic break and I haven't seen her since. So we can also just shut ourselves out of the world for positive and negative, input because we just don't trust the world. So an inability to tolerate intense emotions of any kind, including positive ones, is a very good indicator that it's just some distressing event. It's not necessarily about using the word trauma. It's about saying, I've had an experience in my life where this area of my life became very distressing in a moment or in many moments. And that's another way to look at it. And then if you blame yourself, like a lot of the times, like we're going through psychosocial stages when we're a kid and there's a point where it's our parents' job to tell us that anything that they may be experiencing isn't our fault. Anything that may be going on in the household isn't our fault. And if we're not reassured that, then there's a high likelihood that we're going to say, oh, in our minds, oh, or out loud, my parents are fighting because of me. And sometimes parents, in relation to like emotional neglect or emotional abuse or mental abuse, could say, even just one time, if your parent says, I wish I never had you. You make my life so much more difficult. Or I sacrificed my whole life for you. And I've heard these things, and I've worked through them. I'm almost 30. I've worked through them with my mother, but I don't forget, and I don't expect anyone else to forget. And so if we hear that or think that, then we're going to say, we're either going to blame ourselves for any situation that we find ourselves in. And maybe we do put ourselves in those situations, but it's really not our fault because we were put in the first one without a choice. And so we can either excessively blame ourselves, or we can just always want to solve the problem. So we can go above and beyond. And that's sort of related to anxiety. Like, you have a problem, I'll fix it. Because you're trying to repair. You want to prove to yourself that you weren't the problem, because you might not ever hear that from the person that made you feel like you are. I think like just the other really important ones are like, if you feel disconnected from your body, like disassociation or depersonalization, and that usually is from like sexual or physical abuse. You may develop an eating disorder. You just want to kind of punish your body, or self-harm, things of that nature. And then I think another one, just the last one to close it off, is if we find ourselves engaging in behaviors that don't actually align with our values. So like for me, for example, because I think it's, I don't want to bring up any of my clients or anything. And I like talking about what I've been through. I think it helps people know that I really know. I don't just read it in a textbook and I say, I know what you're going through and what this might look like.
Right.
I say, no, I've been there. I know. And like, that's how I can tell you that you can get through it. Your situation's different than mine, but I can walk you through what's going on and what's happened. And so it's if we find ourselves in patterns that don't align with our values. So like for me, I used to have a history of just getting very angry, just very mad. And my core value is to respect everyone, connect with everyone, and help everyone in any way that I can. And I realized that behavior was attached to experiences that I had when I was younger, mirroring people that helped raise me and seeing their reactions to things that were going on in their lives. And I was like, oh, this must be like normal. We think that when we're a kid. And so if anyone that's watching finds themselves saying things to themselves or other people, or doing things to themselves or other people that they don't actually want to be doing, like there's a voice that says, why do I do this? Why do I act like this? You may want to consider speaking with someone and having someone help you look at your past, because there's probably more than likely either one incident or multiple incidences where your mind and body said, this is the way you should do life.
Absolutely. Wow. Yes, that was very helpful. I hope that that gives everybody watching an idea of how to reflect and look at yourself and really identify those if there are, and really getting that support and guidance that you need.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So, Dr. Courtney Tracy, I was curious about your self care routine and kind of switching gears a little bit, just because I am a huge advocate for self care and my background is massage and yoga. So, have been constantly telling people how important it is to take care of your body, especially your mind. And so I was just curious if you could share some things that you use to support you in your self-care.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for asking. Since I've already shared a little bit that I have, I have trauma from my childhood. I have trauma from my young adulthood, my college years, and I have trauma that happened as recently as 3 months ago and then a year and a half ago. So my life is, and part of it is that I work with people who are very unwell, and I experience trauma when their treatment course doesn't go as expected, and very catastrophic things can happen. I'm in the field of addiction and major depression. And so it's like because my nervous system is rooted in anxious responses and submitting to just like, I don't know, like I'm just through the course of healing, I'm very aware of what my body and mind want to do to try to help protect me when it's not really what's helping me. And we don't know that. We have to consciously say, and that's really what self-care is we have to consciously say, I'm going to take over the reins of what my life has decided of how I'm going to respond. And we have to, override that. And that's what self-care does, is it's us making a conscious choice to override ways that we may want to respond. So for me, I have to be in tune with my body completely. It's definitely where, all my stuff is stored, all my stuff throughout my life. So I do yoga every morning. I at least do 10 minutes. Sometimes I do 30 or 45, and I just do it online at home. I just use YouTube to do yoga, because I have, like doing these is very helpful because my body reacts to being in person. I get very nervous. And so I do yoga at home, and it's a good medium for me to work my body out and engage in that type of somatic healing. And then I meditate. After I'm doing yoga, then I meditate. So I get my body in this state of unification and control. And then I move to a more relaxation experience where I can feel my body calm and really integrate that into my cognition and my thought process, so that I remember. So for 10 minutes after my yoga, I'm internalizing this feeling of calmness. You know, I own 3 businesses and I have all the social media stuff that I'm doing. And so my mind very quickly moves away from calmness and moves into go, go, go mode. So I have to take that time for myself. And then I read, you know, for me, I like, you know, I read every night as often as I can, and I read slowly. I highlight very like important points for me, like, because I'll just read quickly. Like I can like skip over words and just, okay, I got the idea for the paragraph. And that's just not the point. You know,
Right.
reading is it's a calming pastime if you're doing it as a leisure experience. So yoga, meditation, reading, and then I try to get out into the sun. I'm very busy, but I try. It's so helpful to do that for so many different reasons. And then I just reflect, you know, each day, like there's a whiteboard that me and my husband have in our bedroom. And we ask ourselves these questions. What are your goals for the day? How can I help you? And what are you grateful for? So those are the 3 things that we ask ourselves each day. And we fill it out each morning, you know, unless it's super hectic. We have a 1.5-year-old little boy. So, but as often as we can, how can I help you? Which helps us connect. What are your goals for the day so that we can be aware of each other's experience? And then what are you grateful for? And it gives us time to just, you know, so we're reflecting, we're handling our body, we're handling our thoughts through meditation, and then we're handling our feeling of, you know, what is the most meaningful to us and how can we share that with one another. So that's currently my self-care plan. It used to be, and I might be the only therapist, maybe not the only one, but one of the few that say that, you know, my self-care used to be doing drugs and alcohol. It used to be, I'm going to numb my pain so that my life is easier. And it was a way of coping. And it actually was a form of self-care. It was a damaging form of self-care. But nonetheless, that was me caring for myself to help me get rid of all of the pain that I had. So clearly I've taken a different path and I haven't been engaging in that type of behavior in a long time. But I think it's important to share that, you know, anyone that's listening that says, well, I don't do yoga, I don't meditate, I don't read, I don't do breath work, I don't, you know, so I'm just like doing a terrible job at taking care of myself. I just want to, you know, put a plug in there that anything that you're doing to survive your life is you caring for yourself. It's you saying, I want to live. I value myself enough to live, even though I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z that's not good for my body or my mind. I'm choosing to live, you know, as much as I can. And so it's all self-care, but there's positive self-care that should be encouraged. But then also just acknowledgement that if you're coping, however you're coping, and good job. And when you're ready to change that, then reach out.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you. I love how you said with your reading in particular, because I love reading actual books as well, that you read slowly. I like that you do that. I'm going to start doing that. Sometimes I get mad that I'm not reading fast enough, but I like that then you kind of really engage with that and it really sinks in. Awesome.
Yeah.
So for anybody who is starting out on their healing journey, they've identified that they probably have either they've done the ACE test or they have understand that they probably have some signs of unresolved trauma. What would you suggest that they do to start their healing journey? Do you have a couple things that you would suggest that they can start now doing?
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, instead of maybe mentioning like actual physical things or activities that they could do, I think for me, I'll take this in terms of getting your mind ready, because I mean, we can look up, like you could read it, you could, like, you know, I always say you could Google, like, I'm going to start trauma work, what do I do? And there'll be, you know, maybe like get a journal to write down your feelings or download a meditation app so you can do meditation after. But I think, you know, what you can't necessarily find through words on the internet is the feeling that can be expressed by someone actually saying with their voice that you need to be ready. You need to prepare yourself for choosing to experience trauma, because that's what you're doing.
Right.
The trauma that you did not have a choice towards experiencing, you are going to be making the choice to go experience it one more time so that you can reconcile with your life and your body and your mind that you want to let it go. So it's really just, be ready and be gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
You do not have to do it quickly. There is no right way and there is no wrong way. You are the compass towards your own healing. No one else is going to tell you where you want to go or where you're going to go. That's going to be a choice that you make consciously and unconsciously as you continue to travel through your life, see what you've been through and what the results have been from that, and then decide where you want to go. So just be gentle and be ready.
I love that answer. I love that.
Thank
That's
you.
so great because that's something you don't get told. You don't get warned in a sense of there's some preparation that you need to do when you are ready to visit that again and go digging into that. Yeah. And last but not least, if there's the folks that are on live, if you guys have any questions or comments, I'd love if you could send those in the comment box below. And how can our viewers best connect with you? How do you like to be connected on social media, or how do you like to do that?
Yeah, so anyone that wants to really get a personal response from me, it would be best to send me an email. I'm working on getting my professional website up and running, but for now I have my social media website up, and that is thetruthDoctor.com. And so you can go on there if you want to. So join my online membership. And what I'm doing is, for example, I'm taking a different mental health topic every month and creating a course, like a self-guide for someone. Like if it was the trauma one, for example, it would be all the information that I provided here in more detail. And then with roadmaps of books to read or songs to listen to or meditations and things of that nature. So I have that's starting on July 1st on thetruthDoctor.com. And then my email to reach me is just hello@thetruthDoctor.com. And then my social media is really where I'm taking off at this point. And so I have a TikTok, I have an Instagram, a Twitter, a YouTube, a Pinterest. I have all of those. I'm primarily active on Instagram and TikTok for now. So all the information that I just provide out into the world for free, the content, the more psychological content is on Instagram. And then on TikTok, it's more so showing a little bit of my personality and then being able to use my voice and reenactments to help people feel like any mental health issues can be normalized. So it's really two different ways that I'm engaging with the population, that is everyone in the world, when it comes to mental health. So yeah, that's what I would say. Primarily those.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. I will also note those in the comments under this video. So yes, absolutely. And I can't thank you enough for this opportunity to have you on this live interview and sharing all of these and talking about trauma and learning how to start dealing with it. I think these are major questions that do not get answered. And I think a lot of people out there will definitely benefit from all of this information, and they'll have a roadmap, of what to do and a general idea of what they have been possibly experiencing with their trauma. So
Yeah,
thank you so
thank you
much.
so much. Yeah, you're welcome.
Cool. Well, we will sign off for now. And if you would like to connect with Dr. Courtney Tracy, I will put all of her information included in the details below. So thank you again. And we will sign off for now. And I'll see you next time.
All right. Thank
You're very
you.
welcome. Bye.
Bye.